Good morning. Not a happy day, but yes, good morning.
It is not a happy day. We've been talking for the last 24 hours about Ozzy Osbourne.
Together, they conquered the world. Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness, and Gene Simmons, the face of Kiss. They weren't just rock stars. They were empires and larger-than-life icons who redefined music, fame, and rebellion. But behind the screaming crowds and platinum records, Ozzy was silently unraveling. The world saw the wild man on stage, but few knew what it really cost him. And through it all, Gene Simmons watched closer than most. What did Gene see in Ozzy's final days that changed everything? Once you discover the shocking truth, you'll never remember Ozzy the same way again. The origin of a wild friendship. Gene Simmons and Ozzy Osbourne have had one of the most unlikely friendships in music history. It began sometime in the mid-1970s, a time when both Kiss and Black Sabbath were rising forces in the world of rock music. Kiss was known for their explosive stage performances and comic book-style makeup, while Black Sabbath had already begun carving out a darker, more intense sound that would lay the foundation for what we now call heavy metal. It was during this era of explosive creativity and relentless touring that Gene Simmons and Ozzy Osbourne first crossed paths, and the bond that formed would last decades. Back then, the rock scene was smaller than people might think. While today these artists are seen as larger-than-life icons, during the mid-70s they were often playing the same venues, sometimes sharing stages and even hotel hallways. According to Simmons, one of the early meetings happened when Kiss opened for Black Sabbath during one of Sabbath's tours in 1975, a period when both acts were touring heavily across the United States and Europe. What surprised Gene Simmons the most was how drastically different Ozzy Osbourne was offstage compared to the wildman persona he projected under the spotlight. Known for his chaotic stage energy, outrageous antics, and raw, primal vocals, Ozzy seemed like someone who would be impossible to contain. But once the lights dimmed and the audience faded, Simmons described Ozzy as someone polite, reserved, and even a little shy in private settings. This contrast between Ozzy's two worlds fascinated Simmons, who admired how Ozzy could flip a switch and go from reserved to completely unhinged on command. It was this balance between performance and personality that created mutual respect between them. Ozzy's legacy in music didn't just begin and end with Black Sabbath, although his contributions to that band alone would have been enough to cement his place in music history. As one of the original founders and the lead vocalist of Black Sabbath from 1968 until his departure in 1979, Ozzy helped pioneer an entirely new genre, influencing generations of musicians across the globe. The themes were darker, the riffs heavier, and the lyrical content often touched on things most bands at the time wouldn't dare sing about, like war, mental illness, addiction, and the occult. It was unique, and it completely shifted the direction of rock music forever. After leaving Black Sabbath, Ozzy didn't slow down. He redefined himself. His solo career, which started in 1980 with the album Blizzard of Oz, proved that he wasn't just a frontman. He was a full-blown star. With new hits, he reached a new generation of fans and solidified his reputation as one of rock's most enduring voices. Over the decades, Ozzy has sold more than 100 million albums worldwide when counting both his work with Sabbath and his solo releases, a staggering number by any measure. The industry eventually caught up to what fans had known for years. Ozzy Osbourne was recognized not just as a personality or a performer, but as a true innovator in music. In 2006, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame alongside the rest of Black Sabbath, and in 2024, he achieved the rare honor of being inducted a second time, this time as a solo artist. That dual recognition placed him among a very elite group of musicians. He's also won 5 Grammy Awards and received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. His influence isn't limited to music either. His impact on popular culture is massive. In 2014, he received the Global Icon Award at the MTV Europe Music Awards, a title few artists can claim. And let's not forget Ozzfest, the touring metal festival he co-founded, which grossed over $100 million and gave a platform to countless emerging heavy metal bands around the world. Gene Simmons, of course, isn't a minor figure in this story either. As the co-founder of Kiss, Simmons helped redefine what a rock band could be. Kiss wasn't just about the music, it was about the full spectacle. With outrageous costumes, face paint, fire breathing, and pyrotechnics, Kiss became as much a visual experience as an auditory one. The band has released more than 40 albums and sold over 100 million records globally. And Simmons, always the businessman, turned the Kiss brand into a global empire. From lunchboxes and action figures to comic books and pinball machines, he understood early on that music was only part of the equation. Simmons also brought his persona into the world of reality television with Gene Simmons' Family Jewels, which aired from 2006 to 2012. The show gave fans a glimpse into his home life, including his long-term relationship with Shannon Tweed and their children, and further expanded his cultural presence beyond the music industry. In 2014, Kiss was officially inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a milestone Simmons had long said he both deserved and expected. Over the years, Simmons and Osbourne continued to speak respectfully of each other. Despite their vastly different public personas, Simmons as the calculated businessman and media figure and Ozzy as the unpredictable Prince of Darkness, their friendship always rested on mutual respect and shared experience. Both had faced intense public scrutiny, internal band conflicts, addiction, reinvention, and the brutal grind of a life on the road. And both had come out the other side with careers that lasted far longer than anyone expected. But while their careers soared to unimaginable heights, not everything came without a cost. For Ozzy in particular, the price of fame was steep, and that cost would reveal itself in painful and life-altering ways. The price Ozzy Osbourne had to pay. Behind every standing ovation and platinum record in Ozzy Osbourne's career was a cost that few ever saw or fully understood. As one of the most recognized and controversial figures in rock history, Ozzy paid a steep emotional, physical, and personal price for his fame. The world saw the Prince of Darkness, the wild man with a slurred accent and unpredictable behavior, but few stopped to consider the toll that public life took on the person behind the persona. Fame gave Ozzy Osbourne everything, and at the same time, slowly took parts of him away. One of the first and most persistent challenges Ozzy faced was intense public scrutiny. From the earliest days of Black Sabbath, Ozzy had been a target for criticism from the media, religious groups, and even political figures. He wasn't just famous, he was controversial. His lyrics, his stage behavior, and his overall image were regularly blamed for encouraging rebellion or societal decay. Over time, that scrutiny evolved but never disappeared. In the 2000s, attention shifted from music to more personal matters. His health, his history of substance abuse, and his family dynamics were constantly under the microscope. News headlines routinely dissected everything from his marriage to rumors about his mental stability. That spotlight became even more intense when The Osbournes aired on MTV in 2002. The show was a cultural phenomenon, turning Ozzy from a legendary musician into a reality TV icon. For millions of viewers, the Osbourne household became must-see television, complete with chaos, profanity, and strangely relatable family dysfunction. Ozzy was suddenly not just a rocker, but the confused, mumbling father figure trying to live peacefully in a house filled with cameras, dogs, and drama. While the show introduced him to a whole new generation, it also peeled back the curtain on a man who was clearly struggling. Ozzy later admitted that the show was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it re-energized his public image and brought in financial success. On the other, it exposed deeply private family struggles to a global audience. He didn't always like how he came across as tired, out of it, and sometimes detached. The stress of being constantly recorded added another layer of pressure to an already exhausting life. Another painful consequence of Ozzy's success was the pressure to keep performing, even when his body was begging him to stop. For decades, he pushed himself to continue touring, even as injuries, surgeries, and health challenges made it harder with each passing year. In his later years, the man who once ruled the stage now had to remain physically grounded just to get through a song. Yet Ozzy insisted on doing it, not because he needed the money, but because he felt an obligation to his fans and his legacy. That sense of duty and his inability to walk away from the spotlight led to another consequence: and that was a growing sense of isolation. Despite being surrounded by people, Ozzy often felt alone. Fame, as he later reflected in interviews, had cut him off from normal experiences. Simple things like going to the grocery store, taking a walk in the park, or attending a school event without security became impossible. The constant attention had built walls around his life, and even though those walls were made of admiration and fame, they were still walls. Ozzy's long battle with addiction only deepened this sense of disconnection. Throughout his career, he struggled with alcohol and various other substances. These weren't just occasional indulgences, they were full-blown dependencies that nearly cost him everything more than once. He had multiple stints in rehab and often relapsed after periods of sobriety. In interviews, he was brutally honest about the grip addiction had on him, describing himself as his own worst enemy. Despite the darkness, he credited his wife, Sharon Osbourne, with helping him survive the worst of it. Her tough love approach and constant presence became one of the few anchors in his life. His struggles extended into mental health as well. Ozzy has spoken openly about suffering from depression and inappropriate thoughts, especially in his younger years. Fame didn't protect him from self-doubt. If anything, it amplified it. Even at the height of his career, he admitted to feeling like a fraud at times, wondering whether he truly deserved the success he'd found. He also revealed that he suffered from dyslexia and attention deficit issues, which affected his learning and confidence growing up, and those insecurities often lingered well into adulthood. The pressure didn't just stay within him, it seeped into his family life too. One of the most painful public episodes came in 2016, when news broke that Ozzy had been involved in an affair with a hairstylist. The revelation caused a temporary separation from Sharon, ending decades of what many believed was an unshakable bond. It wasn't just a celebrity scandal, it was a deeply personal fracture that played out in front of millions of people. Ozzy later admitted the affair was part of a larger pattern of self-destructive behavior he had struggled with for years. Sharon, after initially walking away, eventually chose to reconcile. The couple renewed their vows in 2017 in a private ceremony, choosing to heal rather than let their marriage become another casualty of fame. But surviving that long in the public eye also meant carrying a long list of controversies. And as much as Ozzy was admired, he was also criticized, often harshly, for the very behaviors and choices that made him famous. And these controversies shaped the legend he ultimately became. The controversial side of Ozzy. For all the praise and success Ozzy Osbourne achieved throughout his career, controversy was never far behind. In fact, at times it felt like controversy followed him wherever he went, whether he intended it or not. Some of the backlash stemmed from deliberate stage antics, while other moments came from misunderstandings or the unpredictable consequences of fame. But either way, Ozzy spent much of his life defending his name, his music, and his intentions against a world that didn't always understand what he was trying to say or who he really was. One of the most persistent sources of criticism throughout his career came from religious and conservative groups. As the frontman of Black Sabbath and later as a solo artist, Ozzy became a symbol of rebellion and, to many, something darker. His lyrics often explored extremely controversial themes, which critics took as evidence of a darker influence. In fact, some of his songs sparked outrage from Christian organizations, who accused Ozzy of promoting Satanism and encouraging immoral behavior among young fans. But Ozzy was clear about one thing: he never saw himself as evil. In interviews, he repeatedly denied any association with occult practices, insisting that his lyrics were either metaphorical or misunderstood. Mr. Crowley, for example, referenced the real-life English occultist Aleister Crowley, but Ozzy said the song was more about curiosity than worship. He often explained that many of his songs were reflections of internal struggles or social issues, not instructions or beliefs. Still, the rumors stuck, and for decades, he remained a target of angry protesters and parental warning campaigns. The most serious backlash came in the form of legal action. In 1987, Ozzy was sued by the parents of a teenager who had died under tragic circumstances, allegedly after listening to Ozzy's song. The plaintiff argued that the lyrics had influenced the teen to make inappropriate decisions. But Ozzy, along with his defense team, maintained that the song was actually written as a cautionary tale and a warning about the dangers of alcohol abuse. The case was eventually dismissed by the court, but it left a lasting impact. For Ozzy, it was a painful reminder that his art could be misinterpreted in ways that had real-world consequences. Beyond legal and moral controversies, Ozzy also became infamous for several shocking on-stage and off-stage moments, some of which defined his reputation for decades. The most well-known of these occurred on January 20th, 1982, during a performance in Des Moines, Iowa. A fan had thrown what Ozzy thought was a rubber bat onto the stage. In the spirit of theatricality, he picked it up and bit into it, only to immediately realize the bat was real. He was rushed to the hospital afterward for rabies shots, but the story quickly made headlines around the world and became one of the most talked-about incidents in rock history. That same year, another infamous moment unfolded, this time off-stage. During a visit to San Antonio, Texas, Ozzy, reportedly intoxicated and wearing one of Sharon's dresses after she had hidden his clothes to stop him from going out, urinated on the Alamo Cenotaph, a monument honoring those who died in the Battle of the Alamo. The act was seen as a sign of deep disrespect by Texans, and Ozzy was arrested. More importantly, he was banned from the city of San Antonio for 10 years. The incident became a flashpoint in his career, feeding into his image as reckless and outrageous. In 1992, he publicly apologized and donated some money to the Daughters of the Republic of Texas, an organization dedicated to preserving the Alamo. Eventually, the city lifted the ban. These controversies, while damaging to his public image at times, also played a part in solidifying Ozzy's cultural icon status. Whether people loved him or hated him, they couldn't stop talking about him. And in the strange world of rock and roll, being unforgettable is often more valuable than being perfect. Ozzy's ability to survive these moments, to admit when he was wrong, to laugh at himself, and to keep moving forward became part of what made him relatable. Still, no amount of controversy could shield Ozzy from the one thing no rock star can outrun: time. As he grew older, his health challenges became more serious. The wild man, who once ran across stages and headlined arenas, began slowing down. And in the twilight of his life, the world began to wonder, how much longer would we have Ozzy Osbourne? Final days and tragic passing of Ozzy Osbourne. By the time Ozzy Osbourne entered the final chapter of his life, the physical toll of decades spent performing, touring, and surviving had fully caught up with him. Behind the iconic voice that defined heavy metal was a body that had endured more than its share of trauma, and in the end, those cumulative injuries and health battles proved impossible to outrun. One of the most significant events that accelerated Ozzy's physical decline was a near-fatal quad bike accident in 2003. It happened at his estate in Buckinghamshire, England. The crash left him with a broken collarbone, several fractured ribs, and a damaged vertebra in his neck. Doctors had to insert metal rods into his spine to stabilize the injuries, a decision that saved his life but left him more vulnerable to further damage. Ozzy recovered and even returned to performing, but that accident marked a turning point. He was never physically the same again. In 2019, another serious health scare occurred when he fell at home, dislodging the metal rods that had been implanted years earlier. The fall was devastating. Ozzy later described it as the most painful injury he had ever experienced. He underwent multiple surgeries, endured months of rehabilitation, and faced long periods of bed rest. Simple movements became excruciating, and despite all this, he didn't complain publicly. He just kept trying to get better, determined not to let it be the end. By 2023, after one more spinal surgery, Ozzy was nearly immobile. He relied on canes, support staff, and custom chairs just to move around. It was a stark contrast to the energetic showman fans had known for decades. But even as his mobility faded, Ozzy's voice, humor, and heart remained intact. Adding to the complexity of his declining health was his battle with Parkinson's disease, a diagnosis he had actually received in 2003, but only revealed publicly much later. Parkinson's, a progressive neurological disorder, affected his balance, coordination, and speech. He described the symptoms as frustrating and unpredictable, and though he had known about the diagnosis for years, he only chose to share it when it began interfering significantly with his daily life. Ozzy was open about the fear and uncertainty the condition brought. Some days were better than others, but overall it forced him to slow down, a bitter pill for someone who had lived life so fast. In that same period, he was also diagnosed with emphysema, a chronic lung condition often caused by long-term exposure to smoke. For someone who had spent much of his youth in smoke-filled venues and often indulged in heavy smoking himself, it was not surprising. But it was still serious. The emphysema limited his breathing and endurance, adding yet another layer of difficulty to an already compromised health profile. On top of all that, he suffered from repeated infections, from staph to pneumonia, and flu complications that sent him in and out of hospitals. Each new illness chipped away at his strength. He rarely appeared in public in his final 2 years, except for select pre-recorded interviews and brief messages to fans. Still, Ozzy didn't disappear quietly. In what became a symbolic farewell to his fans, he performed one final show titled Back to the Beginning on July 5, 2025, in Birmingham, England. The location was meaningful. Birmingham was his birthplace and the birthplace of Black Sabbath. The concert was stripped down, emotional, and deeply personal. Ozzy performed seated on a throne, not out of theatrics, but because standing was no longer an option. Surrounded by longtime bandmates and guest artists, he delivered a few classic songs and gave a short, heartfelt message to the audience. It wasn't about proving anything. It was a goodbye in the only way he knew how, through music. Shortly after that final performance, Ozzy retreated from the spotlight entirely. He spent his last days in the English countryside, surrounded by Sharon, their children, and a few close friends. According to those around him, the atmosphere was peaceful. He listened to old records, rewatched family videos, and took comfort in quiet moments. When the news of his passing broke in late July 2025, tributes poured in from around the world. The music industry responded with overwhelming emotion. Sharon Osbourne, in a brief but emotional statement, thanked fans, artists, and friends for their outpouring of support. She said Ozzy had felt deeply loved in his final months and that he left this world exactly how he wanted, with music in his ears and family at his side. She made it clear that the world hadn't just lost a rock star. It had lost a father, a husband, a friend, and a fighter who never gave up. And perhaps no one outside of his family understood that better than Gene Simmons. Because the man who had known Ozzy for over 50 years saw something deeper in him that most people never fully appreciated. And behind the chaos, the headlines, and the controversies, Simmons saw a man with rare honesty, strength, and loyalty. And when the time came, he would be one of the first to speak about what Ozzy really meant to those who knew him best. What Gene Simmons saw in Ozzy Osbourne. In the days following Ozzy Osbourne's passing, few tributes carried the same emotional weight as those from Gene Simmons. A longtime friend, peer, and admirer, Simmons had known Ozzy through the highs, lows, and chaotic middle of a career that redefined rock music. When Simmons appeared on major television platforms, his usual composed presence gave way to something far more personal. He wasn't just reflecting on a fellow musician. He was mourning someone he genuinely loved and respected. What stood out in Simmons' tributes wasn't just the praise, but the depth of feeling behind it. For a man known for his larger-than-life persona and sharp business mind, Simmons spoke from a place of real vulnerability. He described Ozzy not just as a pioneer or performer, but as someone with a rare kind of emotional honesty. Behind all the stage antics and public controversies, Simmons saw a deeply authentic human being who wore his heart on his sleeve and never pretended to be something he wasn't. One of the most meaningful qualities Simmons highlighted was Ozzy's emotional depth. Despite his chaotic image, Ozzy was the kind of person who remembered the names of your kids, asked how your family was doing, and actually listened to the answer. According to Simmons, Ozzy had a way of making people feel seen. Even in a room full of celebrities, he was the one who would walk over to check in, offer a hug, or crack a joke to lighten the mood. Simmons emphasized that this wasn't performative. It was who Ozzy was at his core. Simmons also respected Ozzy's lasting influence on heavy metal, not just as a musician, but as a force of culture. Long before metal became mainstream, Ozzy helped create its blueprint, from the dark, grinding riffs of Black Sabbath to the melodic chaos of his solo work. Simmons had often credited Ozzy as one of the few artists who didn't just follow trends, he created them, and he did it without chasing validation. For Simmons, this originality wasn't just rare, it was irreplaceable. Another quality that stood out to Simmons was Ozzy's ability to stay grounded even as he became one of the most famous people in music. He recalled that Ozzy treated everyone with the same level of respect, whether it was a royal figure or a backstage crew member. There was no hierarchy in the way he interacted with people. To Simmons, that kind of consistency in character was a marker of true authenticity, because it wasn't about being polished or politically correct, it was about being real. And Ozzy, in all his unpredictable, unfiltered glory, was as real as it got. Simmons also praised Ozzy's impact beyond music. He had long admired the cultural shift sparked by the Osbournes, the reality show that opened the door for a new kind of celebrity storytelling. While many in the music industry were skeptical of reality television, Simmons believed Ozzy helped humanize rock stars in a way that hadn't been done before. The show didn't hide the mess, it leaned into it. It made rock legends relatable, and in doing so, it reshaped how fame and family could coexist in the public eye. Above all, Simmons viewed Ozzy as someone truly one of a kind. In his eyes, there had never been anyone like Ozzy before, and there never would be again. That wasn't just about musical style or stage presence. It was about Ozzy's ability to connect with people, to survive against incredible odds, and to keep showing up with the same crooked smile and open heart. Simmons knew plenty of rock stars, but very few who could remain that vulnerable, that funny, and that honest after decades in the business. For Gene Simmons, Ozzy Osbourne wasn't just a fellow performer. He was a friend who defied expectations, broke barriers, and stayed true to himself no matter how much the world changed around him. And as the tributes poured in, it was clear that Simmons wasn't alone in feeling that loss deeply. Ozzy hadn't just shaped music, he had touched lives. And to those who knew him best, that was the part of his legacy that would never fade. What would you miss the most about Ozzy Osbourne? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.